My name is Ken Ford. I'm the museum director at Heritage Park. Tonight we're going to be talking about the Florida Aviation Historical Society and the Ford Flivver, an old airplane that came about in the 20s. And our first guest this evening is Ed Hoffman. Ed's a designer, pilot, and a man about town in Tarpon Springs. The winner of our first preservation award last year as an individual. Ed, I guess the first question I want to ask you is, how did the Florida Aviation Historical Society get started?
I think mostly just a group of aviation buffs who liked old airplanes and liked events and getting together, and we got together and did a lot of talking, and in fact we used to get together in the old church over in Heritage Park. I think what really got going is when we hit on the idea, why don't we do something besides sit around and just talk. The idea thought came up of building a replica of the Benoit. There was no original Benoit flying boat. It had been destroyed in 1915 in St. Petersburg. So we hit on this Benoit project, and we took off from there.
How many members does the Florida Aviation Historical Society have?
Right now, our membership is right around 800 across the state.
Do we have any out-of-state membership?
Yes, quite a few. Of California, through the Midwest, Northeast.
How does someone go about joining this organization?
Just send $5 to to our treasurer, and you will be on the list. And you get a newsletter and keep up with what we're trying to do is preserve aviation in Florida.
All right. When you say preserve aviation in Florida, besides the Benoit, what other projects are?
Well, our second project is underway now, and that's the Ford project here. Its connection with Florida was that it unfortunately crashed here in 1928, and the pilot Brooks was killed. It was built by the Ford Motor Company and under Henry's directions, and we looked into the project. We had one of our members who was particularly interested in building this, and after we finished the Benoit and flew it across the bay, well then this Ford project came up on the slate, and the more we looked into it, we found the original designer, and he was alive and well, and contacted him, and we started on the project.
When you say you're starting a project, what kind of research went into, looking at the plane and getting some prints and the engine and all the rest of it?
We had no plans. Henry had apparently destroyed them all when after Brooks got killed. Brooks was the pilot and a family friend of the Ford family. Lived on a farm near Henry Ford when Henry was growing up, and he was rather devastated by this whole event and got out of aviation completely.
I think before
he destroyed the plans. There were no plans available, so we had to draw our own plans. But we did have Otto Koppen, the original designer, was in his 80s, but he came down and helped very much in drawing the plans.
I think before we get too much further into it, what was the purpose of the Ford Flivver? I mean, what was Henry Ford's idea in building this plane? Did he have something in mind, like the Model T, or was this going to be mass-produced?
Well, this was right after Lindbergh flew the ocean, and the world had become very, very aviation-minded, and the thought of having an airplane in every garage was popular science. Still, it's on that subject, but Ford took this up. But part of it was a long process with Henry himself of what he was wanting to do, and he was a little bit disturbed because his son Edsel was getting interested in aviation and had bought an airplane and had gotten connected with Bill Stout, which they later built the Ford Trimotor, but it was called Stout Air Car then, and Henry felt a little left out of all this, and so he sort of got into his own project, and he hired this fellow I'll tell you about, Otto Koppen, and he said he wanted an airplane to fit in his office, and so this airplane would fit in Henry's office. Very small, light aircraft. And perhaps the thought was to later produce these number, but we really don't know for sure.
Well, what time frame are we looking at here? When
We're talking about 27, years 26, 27, 28.
Okay, so
You see, the airplane has no end number. This is a very early airplanes. Air Commerce Act had just been enacted, and the government was just organizing aviation. But
and what about Brooks, the pilot? You mentioned Brooks. What's his full name?
Harry Brooks. As I said, Harry was the son of the family that lived on the adjacent farm in Michigan, and at the time of the flight, when Harry was killed, well, Harry was the only one who ever flew this airplane except Lindbergh. Lindbergh, of course, was taken as a great hero in aviation in those days. He'd just flown across the ocean, and he came to Michigan and to Ford Motor Company, and they let him fly the airplane. But he and Harry Brooks are the only ones that ever flew it.
Okay. And when we mentioned Otto Coppens, Otto was a fairly young man at that time. In fact, Otto just died this past week at 89,
Yes,
didn't he?
right.
Right. And he was in his 20s, I guess.
Right. He just graduated from MIT, and he has quite a background. He later went back to MIT and taught for 40 years.
So was it all in aero engineering, or?
Yes, yes. He loved airplanes from the very start, and he was aviation minded than anybody ever was.
Did Otto ever come down and look at your project, give you
Oh
any
yes,
help with it?
yes. He helped when he started the project. He came down. It was right interesting because I called him thinking I would perhaps get a nursing because I knew he was in his 80s, and I called on the phone, and he answered, and he asked me where we were going to. I told him about the project, what we wanted to do, and he says, "Whereabouts are you going to be building this?" And I says, "Well, at the Clearwater Air Park." He says, "I know that place." He says, "I flew in there last year." And lo and behold, he came flying down in his own airplane, and by himself, little Grumman, and landed, and made himself known to us, and we picked up from there. He helped draw the plans, went over a lot of the features of it, best he could remember, because this was quite a few years back for him.
Well, sure.
But very interesting man, very big background in aviation history.
Do you plan to fly the plane when you get it built?
Oh yes, yes, it'll fly, and probably flew very good. It's there's nothing to prevent it flying at all. We don't have the original engine. The original engine, I guess, there's only one built, and it's in the Dearborn Museum now. So we're using a Franklin engine, and
Is that close to the original?
it's two-cylinder. It's an aircraft. It's air-cooled, four-cycle engine, and it's about the closest thing we could find to be reliable, because we want something that would stay with us if we're going to fly.
You don't want anybody killed in this.
Right.
What, who's going to be the pilot?
I don't know. We'll have to draw straws or something.
Got any candidates in mind for a pilot?
Well, probably somebody who's flown small, light aircraft is about the only qualification. I don't think it would be any problem at all. Had some experience with home builds, probably, with all the things that come on with that may happen, controls and how it flies, and lifting it off and seeing if you have control after it gets in the air. And
How long a project do you expect this to be? I mean, well, from start to finish, how long is it going to take to?
well, I think we're probably about 2.5 years, or maybe almost 3 years time we get done.
When you were doing the Benoit, the first plane, what was the time frame on that project?
I'm trying to remember that. It must have been close to 5 years.
5 years on the Benoit.
Because it took a long time. We just went by photograph there. We had no designer. Obviously, he was gone many, many years ago. And it had to be all done from photographs. While here we did have the original designer, and it was a more up-to-date airplane and more to our present-day light aircraft. This one is steel tube fuselage and fabric-covered wooden wings very conventional as far as modern light aircraft are concerned. So it was, well, the Benoit was something a little bit further back in history, and very light construction, all wood. And
How much money is it going to take to, complete this project from start to finish? I mean, just ballpark it here. You don't have to be exact, Ed.
give me some figures. I imagine we'll have around $4,000 to $5,000 in the airplane itself, and then the engine, I think it was somewhere around $1,500.
Well, maybe around $7,000, $8,000.
Yes, it'll be under $10,000.
10,000. What does anybody? I guess it didn't get that far with Henry Ford, but how much do you think would it cost to build a thing back in those days?
Not very much for Henry, because he had all this people to draw on, sheet metal people who pound out fenders for Model T Fords. They could certainly pound this nice aluminum, soft aluminum into cowlings. And
Do you think he had this in mind, being the Model T of the air world?
he may have had it in the back of his mind. He wanted to show Edsel, his son, that he could do something on his own without... In other words, he wasn't a has-been. He was up to date and was into aviation, too.
So this was kind of an ego thing with him.
A little bit. According to Otto, this was primarily, he thought, was the main project, why he was there.
He didn't want his son to get too far ahead of him.
No.
Well, that's understandable.
Yeah.
What kind of problems did they have when they were starting out with this aircraft? Did Otto say anything?
Well, they built two airplanes. The first one was not, it was a low wing, but was a single-piece wing. This one has wing on each side, but is built separately. The first one, the wing was built solid all the way across.
I noticed
And it had
straps here.
Yes, these are struts that hold the wings in place. This is a much more efficient airplane. The first airplane was the first airplane Otto had ever built, and he had fooled around with a glider before that, but here he was starting something totally new. And so when he got to this one, he had a little more experience, and he designed a more up-to-date airplane. I think very efficient airplane for its day.
Oh, it looks fairly modern here. It doesn't look too much different than some of the small aircraft that we see today. It's always amazed me when you look at planes that they, some haven't changed that much over the years. The basic design is still there. Well, who are some of the other people involved in this project?
Well, the main one that's doing the main work is a fellow named Warren Barber. I think you'll meet him here later. But I think Warren has been wanting to build this airplane for a long time, and so just like the Ford project, we all rallied around and gathered information, and parts come and information comes from all over the country.
Have you got a lot of correspondence?
Quite a bit of correspondence on it.
With other people around the country on this?
Yes, I think a gentleman that did the overhaul, the original, the first Ford Flivver is hanging in the museum in Dearborn, and or is it Greenwich Village?
Probably Greenfield.
Yeah, but anyway, it's hanging up there, and
Dearborn is where it
a
is.
few years back, this airplane was taken down for refinishing and so forth. This man who did the work took the airplane completely apart, photographed everything, and sent it to Orrin, and that gave us a lot of information how things were done in that day.
What are you doing to raise the money for this project?
Well, it must have been just from our own members. We haven't asked the government or anybody else for money. It's just been strictly our own project.
Okay, and I'm assuming the membership's been very supportive and
Yes, very much.
Financially
Very much.
supportive of this project. Well, I think that's going to come close to concluding the first part of our program, because I do want to get to Mr. Barber here in the second half. I appreciate you being here tonight and talking about the Florida Aviation Historical Society and what they're doing to get this project. Looks pretty exciting. Think you might be the pilot?
Well, who knows? Maybe so.
All right. I want to thank you for being here, and we're going to take a short break right now and pause, and then when we come back, Orrin Barber will be our guest.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Ed.
All right, thank you.
The forest is home to many living things. That's why, if you're careless with fire when you go to the forest, you could burn a lot more than trees.
Welcome back, and our second guest this evening is Orrin Barber. Orrin is an airplane builder extraordinaire, building planes for a long time, and has agreed to work with a group, the Florida Aviation Historical Society, and kind of take over the project and build this new version of the Ford Flivver. Orrin, how did you get started in this project, or maybe we ought to go back even earlier? How'd you get into airplane building?
Oh, just interested in from high school. I bought every aviation magazine that I could get a hold of, and just been interested in aviation all along. And I had a Cub back in the 50s. Flew off a farm strip up there in Ohio. Come down here and got out of it for a little while and went over to Clearwater Air Park, and somebody over there, Arch Young, needed some woodwork done on a wing. I took it home, and suddenly I become a wood expert.
That's what usually happens.
Yes.
Kind of
And,
ease into something like that.
But it's been a good retirement project for me. I retired in '78. I've got time, and I like to work at things like that, and it's just kind of going on from there. It's been the best hobby I've ever had.
What caught your interest about the Ford Flivver?
There was an article in Sport Aviation in '61 about this airplane. It did make a record from Detroit to Titusville. It broke the nonstop distance record for that time, for that weight of aircraft. And since it flew from Detroit to Miami, or to Titusville, it was associated with Florida. The Florida Historical Society was working toward that end, and I just suggested that they be a good project for them, and they picked it up, and I think it's a good project for. I think we can get the word out about the Historical Society, because this one will be able to get around the state on air shows and museums and places, where the bin was just a big airplane that's a little bit hard to move.
Hard to fly.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Ed was the pilot, and we know that was hard to fly. What airspeed did this plane have?
On the record flight, when he left Detroit, he made 78 miles an hour for a little over 1,000 miles down to Titusville. And that was done on a 29-horse engine, in which they didn't fly the thing wide open all the way down, so it probably come down on about 25 horsepower. And when he left Detroit, he had 52 gallons of gas in that thing. And it weighed approximately something in the neighborhood of 1,000 pounds. So it's a pretty efficient airplane for that engine power to pick up 1,000 pounds and get it down here, especially at 78 miles an hour.
We keep talking about he. Who are we talking about here?
Brooks.
Harry Brooks.
Harry Brooks is the only person that ever flew it. He flew it on the record flight. Henry Ford was waiting for him in Miami. And of course he got to Titusville, had a fuel leak, landed there on the beach, and he broke the propeller. Then 3 days later, while he started on nearly at 5 o'clock in the afternoon in February to go on to Miami. He got down to Miami, or Melbourne. They think he was trying to land on the beach, and it was bad weather.
Photograph of him, don't we?
Bad weather, and the sea was rough, and this is a picture taken when it was on the beach at Titusville. And we think these are part of maybe a Ford dealer, maybe a mayor of the town, and we got this picture by accident, and the lady found it in a box of photos, and she was acquainted with the Ford project, and she got that photo and sent it to Dr. Brown, and that was possibly the last photo taken of the Flivver before they lost it in Melbourne.
Was the plane recovered?
The plane was recovered, was in pretty bad shape. It floated out in the Atlantic in that rough water for 2 days and a night. And it washed ashore. They took the wreckage and sent it back to Detroit. And the engine, they have an engine up there on display, and I'm sure that that's the same engine that brought it down here. Mr. Copeland, the builder, the designer, thinks that they only built one engine, and that was a hand-built engine, especially for this aircraft.
It's amazing an engine that small could fly a plane like this, or give it that much power.
It was supposed to deliver 40 horsepower, but through the carburation, and Mr. Copeland said it only made 29 horsepower. He said, I know that's all it made because I built the propeller. So he had to know how much horsepower to be at the pitch and things for the prop.
Now, I think we have a picture of that engine.
Yeah, we have the engine. That was a purely hand-built engine. The Ford engineers went down. Henry said if you're going to make a record flight in the Ford airplane, you're going to have a Ford engine on it. So that's the engine they built, hand-built. Of course, we don't know just how long they took to build it. It was a very simple engine. You've got your camshaft for the exhaust valves, another gear down here for the intake valves. Picked up the oil pump from the front. Man, they made every move work. But since they got the carburation too small on it, just didn't get enough air through it to make 40 horsepower.
Well, I guess 29 horsepower was enough.
It evidently was, but it could have used a lot more horsepower.
Yeah, I would think it would be underpowered at 29 horsepower.
It was.
Well, what kind of problems are you having, in building a plane? Not problems, but what are some things that you've encountered in your, building of the plane?
The thing that makes it so slow is there's no plans, no nothing. We just have to come up to a certain place, and now we need fittings for the wings and the landing gears. And you've got to draw them out, take your steel and cut it out. All the parts are made by hand.
Who's helping with this?
Well, I've done a lot of it, most of it. Arnold Allen has done some. Arnold Allen is the cover expert. Now, he's coming up on the cover. That'll be his project. But we had a Ray Hoven, a retired carpenter and cabinet maker, and he did the wings. So the fuselage is all steel tubing, and I welded that up. Mr. Hoven's worked the wings. We'll get Arnold in there on the fabric, and there's a man from Massachusetts, and he says he'll do the metal work up on top. So it's kind of a cooperative effect. By the way, we have a Franklin engine that St. Arnold found in Anchorage, Alaska. So that's the engine that's on it. And we've got instruments from, a man gave us the big main instrument on the instrument panel from McGraw, New York. And we picked up parts like that, just volunteered, give it to us, and man, anything that we've been able to use it.
How do you hear about, where an engine is or a part is?
Well, the resters mostly. Somebody will say, we're looking for something. And, well, he knows where it is, and we procure it from that.
Is this word of mouth? Or
Just word of mouth. We haven't advertised for anything other than the engine.
That's amazing. How did you find out about the engine up in Alaska?
In traded plane, and then Satan got on the phone, and he finally located that engine. It had been taken out of another aircraft and had been in storage for about 2 years. And it's got 800 hours on it, but 50 hours since its overhaul, so it's in real good shape. And we had it sent down with air freight down with Northwest Airlines, and it's probably easier that way than by freight because it got rattled around.
Sounds like you have some real requisition experts here.
It's worked out real well, real well.
I think if I were someplace stranded on an island, I want these guys around.
Arnold Allen bought the wheels at the Lakeland Air Show, and when Mr. Copeland was down, he asked me about the wheels. They're really small motorcycle wheels. And Mr. Copeland asked me if what size wheel we're going to use. And I showed it to him, and he said, how big are they? Well, at that time, they measured the outside diameter, and 18 by 3s. And he said, well, that's just the right size. That's the size that was on the original. So it's just things like that that just dropped in, and we've been real fortunate. real fortunate.
I had a question talking about fabric. When you say fabric back here, what type of fabric was it?
They used cotton at that time, cotton fabric, and but we're using Dacron. It heat shrinks, lasts about 3 times as long, and real tough stuff. And pretty much all the aircraft now are being recovered as ones that use their fabric. Pretty much all of them using Dacron or Seconite. It's the same thread, only it's a different manufacturer.
Do you coat it then with something?
Yeah, it's doped. It's got several coats of dope on it in your paint. And it'll last 15, 20 years without anything. By that time, you ought to look in the inside anyway.
Well, it lasts longer than maybe some of us will,
Yeah.
you know?
No doubt.
What are these straps right here?
Those are struts. The lift of the wing is picked up from here, and the two of them go together across a bar that goes across the fuselage, and that really carries the whole weight. It's just like a bridge. You just pick it up. And that is heavy steel tubing, and then the width here is just take metal and streamline it, and that'll all be covered and make it look a little different than just tubing sitting out there.
How much does the total airplane weigh?
We're shooting for 650 pounds. And by going backwards on the weight, the amount of fuel, we know it had 5 gallons of oil, the weight of the pilot, and the original weight's something over 500 pounds. But all replicas get built a little bit heavier. And but we've got twice the horsepower that they had, so I'm not worried too much about it. If it flew on 29, and we can throttle our engine back and get 50 out of it, so
Oh, you got twice the horsepower.
we got
on it.
twice the horsepower.
The number back on the tail, what does that represent?
That was the number that was assigned to this aircraft, and by accident in a book that we had of all the numbers, all aircraft, I happened to find that one was open. And
I think we got a photograph showing the numbers on the...
That's the number on the original aircraft, and through the FAA, that number happened to be open. And
So you got the
called for it,
original number
and
back.
It's got the original number on it, and I felt pretty proud of that, because a lot of times you've got other numbers and initials and everything else on them, and to have the original airplane and the original number, it's kind of unusual.
Okay, so what you're telling me is we're going to get ready to build this plane and fly it pretty soon.
I hope so. I worked on a lot and have
Yeah.
high hopes of getting it done.
You're not going to be the pilot, are you?
No, that's Ed's job or somebody else's.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for being here. We really appreciate it, and it sounds like a very interesting project. Thank you very much.